this one with kids who are just not engaged and not learning the things, the skills and the competencies that they should. You all are more interested in classrooms that look like this, lots of agency, lots of different modalities going on, lots of different learning patterns, and lots of deep engagement around real, authentic, student-centered learning. And so the question is, how do we help the nation move towards a definition that reflects all these things that we all know, that these are the skills that not just the world's economic powers and virtually all employers want to see, but that parents know, educators know, anybody who's entering the workforce knows, and how do we end up moving the rock, in Grant Lippmann's phrase in his book Moving the Rock, of systemic inertia. You've all, if you've raised your hand to try to make some of this work happen, you've probably heard some versions of the pushback that we see around the rock on this screen. And it's very earnest and well-intentioned pushback. It's just human nature. People believe strongly in the things that they know well and that they believe in general worked for them. But what we know as individuals just has not been reflected in the pace of change among our institutions. And that's maybe a broad statement about society these days, but it may be particularly true for public schools. You could walk into any room today. This is a set of activities and discussions that we do when we're out there talking about this MyWays initiative, and ask any room full of adults what today's second graders need to develop in the way of competencies by the time they graduate from high school. And in 2 minutes, you'll get a good list of 21st century skills. Everybody gets that already. You could also ask them to describe the most powerful, enduring learning experiences of their lives, and give them a few minutes to talk about it. And what will come back is deeply experiential, powerful, purposeful, quite often extracurricular or outside of school learning experiences that they remember as the things, the moments when they really learned the most important things that they learned in their K-12 years. You can even ask them how, in the realm of assessment, how they know that they became good at something. Just ask people to name what they're competent at and how they understood that they were making progress towards competency and then had attained a certain degree of it. And what will come back is a whole tapestry of different forms of usually performance-based assessment. So, people get all this, and they know it through the path of their own learning experience, and yet they're also able to hold in their heads this very traditional idea of what quote-unquote school looks like. So it's that conundrum that prompted us to create this initiative, the MyWays initiative. This is the cover of the website, and I'm going to pause right now to play a little 2-minute video that will give you an overview of what NGLC's MyWays is all about.
There are a lot of big questions being asked about public education today. But the biggest question is, are we even asking the right ones? Our public schools were well designed for another time, but the way we live, the way we work, it's all changing. And there's no going back. Our schools and the way our kids learn and the very ways we define success in the 21st century, these need to change too. Understanding why this change is so important and what it all means for schools. This work needs to be taken up by whole communities. It takes educators, parents, students, employers, community leaders. It takes all of us to reimagine what's possible in our public schools and to chart a course toward making that vision real. The MyWays project, from the nonprofit initiative Next Generation Learning Challenges, was designed to help communities that are ready to take this step. 3 years in development, this nonprofit project distills all the relevant research and provides a range of tools and frameworks to help communities move forward. It comes from educators and partners who have created some of the country's most pioneering schools of reimagined next generation learning. MyWays gives leaders the research and tools they need to successfully address the big questions every community should be asking about their public schools. Why the urgent need for fundamental change? What does that imply about the skills students must develop to succeed at the high school? How can schools enable students to build this richer, deeper set of competencies? How can they measure progress in ways that support learning? MyWays is not a school model. It won't give you quick answers, and it won't give you checklists. MyWays is a growing national community and a resource for leaders who are ready to make a deep commitment to perhaps the most important work of our time. What learning to thrive in a world of change.
Great. So that was, now let's see if I can get the control of the screen back. Okay. That video is on the MyWays website. We'll give you that URL, although probably you've already gotten it from the invitation to join this webinar. All of this stuff is available completely free and open access. It all reflects work by our 150 or so school model grantees from the last 5 or 6 years worth of grant making that we've done in this space. And it all reflects what we have heard from them over those years, that this work of doing the transition to a student-centered agency building next-gen form of learning is just too hard unless you pay attention to what we've started calling the through line. And the through line relentlessly connects the hows of the learning experience design and gauging student progress back to the core notions of the North Star of skills, knowledge, and habits of success our kids need to develop if they're going to thrive in this century, and why there's such a gap between that definition of success and the current ones that have defined so much practice that goes on in most of our schools across the country. So hearing that chorus from our Next Gen Learning grantees, we set out to do all of this MyWays research in these 3 domains. In education, where we were most familiar, in the realm of human development, where there's a lot of really good burgeoning research that's coming out right now and has been over the last 10 to 20 years. And around the world of work, which is, as everyone knows, a really fast-moving target these days. And it's pretty hard to predict, although if there's one safe prediction, it's that it's going to change a lot, and the jobs that our 10-year-olds are going to be shooting for when they're 18 and 25 are going to be quite different from the jobs that we can imagine right now. We see MyWays having an impact at the ground level among practitioners who use its tools and its research to do their own version of that through line of a response to those 4 questions. And we also see it having an impact in systems, so that things like the high school transcript and the data standards that publishers use all reflect some version the MyWays definition of success. That brings us to the first set of these why questions, these the through line of questions that I'll be quickly dancing through here. This is I use the word dancing advisedly. There's a lot of stuff on to do. Everything that you need to do the work of reimagining and redesign, without having to do the 12 months to 3 years worth of research that we did to produce all this stuff. It's all there. And we have tried to surface resources, tools, activities, discussion points that allow you to engage everybody that you're working with around these questions: the why, the what, and the two hows. This is for instance, this is a resource from Bloomberg that is an interactive map that allows you to plug in your own occupation or any occupation that you want, and see what kind of risk it is of automation in the next 10 to 20 years. We provide this sort of set of data bombs around questions like why it is that the world of working and learning post high school is so much more complex these days for high school graduates than it ever has been before. I mean, just look at these numbers, the choices that they face, and particularly the kids who are not going and shooting for the highly selective colleges. Those challenges are just intense. We talk about other aspects of youth development that we all know to be incredibly important, but that are so underaddressed in the experience of most kids and in the sort of set of priorities for most schools. As an example, social capital building and the power of weak ties. This is from an activity that's among the tools that we provide for communities wanting to have this discussion either within the schools or outside in the communities. You ask everybody in a room to stand up who got a job among their last 2 or 3 through a personal contact. It turns out that the vast majority of those are not really close in family kinds of contacts that everyone generally has. They're completed through the power of weak ties, which is another way to understand how social capital works. Most kids are emerging from high school without any form of social capital that will help them move forward. And so there's a fair amount of research in MyWays about what schools are starting to do to help kids build it. This is what should be. We know this. We all know that these are the kinds of skills that we want kids to have in hand as they move out of high school into the world they face after that. But this is their reality in too many schools. Even schools that deliver this curriculum well are only providing to their kids a portion of the true set of skill building and competency development activities and experiences that they're going to need. So that brings us to the MyWays research around the what. Next Gen Learning Challenges is a nonprofit arm of the nonprofit group EduCause, mostly active in the higher ed space. This is its primary K-12 initiative. We have invested about $85 million over the last 6 years in various efforts to create new kinds of tools and new kinds of schools, all organized around these ideas of student-centered, agency-driven learning. When we launched the development work for MyWays, we looked at all of these frameworks. This is basically a complete set of all of the 21st century competency frameworks out there. And we looked at the experience of all of our grantees, represented by the blue dots on this map. A number of them were very much part of all of this work. And it produced this set of ideas about what the competency set should be that our kids develop by the time they graduate from high school. Those of you who've delved into this research, no matter which 21st century framework you looked at, will probably see lots of overlap, and that's by design. MyWays is designed to be the sort of neutral party, the Switzerland or the Rosetta Stone of all of the competency frameworks out there. We're not in any way saying, all right, everybody should adopt MyWays. We're simply trying to say, let's understand how much overlap there is among them all and increase the interoperability of all of these frameworks and coalesce everyone in this space so that there's a strong voice and conviction about where public education could and should go. I won't go deep into any of these competencies, but you see there are 5 in each of the 4 MyWays domains. There's an easy way to explain how these domains came about. We just use the metaphor of learning to drive. You know, that you need a certain amount of content knowledge to do that, about the rules of the road and how a dashboard works and so on, but you're not actually driving until you're out there looking at creative know-how and in the hands of a good coach or a set of coaches who help you develop those skills and apply that content knowledge. You're not a good driver until you develop the habits of success that give you those eyes in the back of your head and that knowledge about how to merge onto a crowded highway. And none of that really matters all that much unless you also develop your wayfinding abilities to set goals and identify the help and the resources you need to move you along on every stage of the journey that you set for yourself. So this is a quick scan of how MyWays works with selected frameworks. This is a glimpse of one of the tools that we have built out of all of the MyWays competency framework. This is called the Opportunity Engine. Just really quickly, traditional students are moving through a traditional pathway that by age 24 in the top right gives them, if they're successful, quote unquote, a reasonable set of credentials and competencies within that one area of the engine called degrees and credentials. And that represents a set of skills, but a set of skills that's mostly reflected by a fairly narrow idea about how those skills are actually demonstrated. The MyWays research suggests that in the 21st century, along with that set of degrees and credentials, for you to make your way in the world, you also need these other 3. You need in-demand skills of the kind that are relevant in today's world. You need actual work experience that you can point to, because that's what employers are valuing these days. And you need social capital for all kinds of reasons, but including to connect you in this fluid job market with the kinds of opportunities that you're looking for. So schools that are really shooting to prepare their kids for the 21st century are thinking along the lines, whether they're using a map like this or not, that are suggested in the lower set of 3 opportunity engine designs you see right here. Here's another tool. This is a more or less a graphical depiction of an IEP, a student success plan. You see all the 20 MyWays competencies around this competency plotting tool. This shows a composite student we call Tia, who comes to a high school in 9th grade and who plots out on this tool with the black line in the center. And the purple line represents her success plan. And so this is a way for schools and for students themselves, parents, everyone, to understand and value it at a snap, the full set of competencies that they're working with the student to develop. This tool is available on the MyWays site in an Excel macro. You can replace any of the competencies with your own language. It produces a spider graph just like that. That brings us to the how. This is where a lot of you are right now, I imagine, trying to figure out the learning experiences and the assessment experiences that help deliver the learning pathways that students need to develop these competencies. This is a construct that we developed for this project that we call the field of learning. Out there on the left field line are Bloom's thinking skills. You're all familiar with those. Out there on the right field line is the sort of transition from non-authentic, purely classroom-based learning out through simulations to truly complex and authentic learning modalities that are outside of school. The question is, where you think your students are playing on this field of learning. Right now, this is the experience of most kids. In schools, they're learning a lot down there along the third base line. They're doing some labs and research projects. That's good. They might be doing some extracurriculars that are out there more in the center of the diamond. And maybe they're working after school at some simple work that gives them some bounded, authentic kinds of experiences. But really, schools and kids should be playing across the whole field. And this construct is one that we've had a number of NGLC grantees and school teams use with their faculties to just generate the kind of thinking that makes people say, yeah, in the first 10 minutes, I said the most powerful, enduring learning experience of my life was as part of, my school's drama club in high school. And that taught me how to do, 10 of the most important things that I know how to do these days. So why aren't schools organized around the kind of learning that I learned in that drama club? So there are other tools in MyWays that get at richly built out agency building learning experiences. This is one that we've adapted from David Perkins at Project Zero at Harvard. His whole set of concepts around whole learning and how to avoid, as schools move towards active forms of project-based learning, having it turn into high calorie but low nutrient forms of learning that might please the parents and might produce some smiles, but don't reflect the really, really rich design and set of learning experiences that the kinds of learning units developed by schools like High Tech High represent. There's, in fact, in the MyWays tools, a whole learning unit from High Tech High that is presented in the form of that set of constructs from David Perkins. There's another whole set of research on the wider learning ecosystem and the ways many of our grantees and other schools around the country are starting to connect their learning with the communities around them. And not just geographically speaking, but in terms of their core interests and finding ways for them to connect even outside of their own communities. In the realm of assessment, the same sort of thing. What we've tried to do is boil down and distill all of the relevant research into constructs that can give rise to meaningful conversation and then design. In this one, we talk about the two big shifts in assessment design towards greater authenticity, and to multiple and varied measures from single forms of assessment. We use the same field of learning plotting tool to show how assessments, generally speaking, have both followed and shaped practice along that third baseline, and that in schools that are experimenting with something richer and deeper and broader than that, the assessments themselves are playing out across the whole field. This whole set of tools is available on the MyWays site. There's a case study, as I mentioned. It's called Meet the Maya, from High Tech High, that takes you through many of the MyWays constructs, but uses the High Tech High learning unit as its sort of basis. And there's a community of practice that connects people who are interested in all this with those members of the MyWays community that even before we released it, which was only last November, were working with us in designing all this work. These are a few screenshots from the website. The reports are probably more information than most mortals are really going to want to experience, but I would say every third day I hear from somebody who curses me out and says, you know, I was only going to go in for 10 minutes and then an hour and a half later I emerged, because there's so much there that speaks to everything that I've been looking for to condense and bring to my school teams, my school board, my leadership team, my community reform effort, my business leaders. So it's all right there. This is the glimpse of the Excel macro that produces that spider chart. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Amanda. As you heard from Delano, Amanda works with one of the nodes in our grantee community in Chicago. This one is that has gone deepest in their use of MyWays, both at the level of sort of organizational rethinking and redesign around the new definition of success, and as you'll hear, especially from her, around what it would look like if you designed a whole school with this set of ideas at its core. So Amanda, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Andy. We can hear me? We're good. You guys, Andy, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good.
So I've been, every time we talk about MyWays, and it's so funny because a lot of the, conferences that we'll attend or other schools are like, you're really onto this MyWays stuff. And I'm always like, yes, like this is what people need to realize. Andy mentioned that the spider graph looked like, an individualized education plan. I was a special education teacher. And so as a special education teacher in our schools 12 years ago, I was designing assistive technology. I was designing transition planning. I was writing individual plans. I was making social and emotional learning goals. I was focusing on non-academics. I was working with social workers and psychologists to build profiles of students. And, all of that is the definition of personalized learning. And all of that is good for all kids. I was laughing the other night. Can you believe that, 7 years ago, you had to have an IEP to use a computer in the classroom?
Oh.
That stuff like that of what's good for everybody. So, and to Andy's point too about like you dig into this platform and there's so much to read, and there's, I used it as my beach read on vacation because it was the only time that I could really get as deep as I wanted to because I love this work. So Distinctive Schools entry point. So I am over the past 6 or 7 years as Distinctive Schools has started up, I've served in a strategy and next generation learning designer role for all of our schools, very broadly across our network. And now this year, with the approval of a new school, I'm getting back into the trenches and going deep as a school designer and school director. Take all this learning over the last 5 years and really see what it's like to apply it. So distinctive schools' entry point into MyWays is we kind of think of the sword and the shield. So the shield of, it gives us a bank of research and ideas, to defend our work, to explain our work, but then the sword to poke holes at new ideas, to look at things and to move forward. So as our network is moving on, we consider the sword and the shield. Through MyWays, on a bigger level of distinctive, we're using it as one of the major paths because it's so vast, it provides amazing opportunity for so many different types of educators to cling on to parts of it that are their passion. We believe passion drives performance. So if you look at the reports and you read the one-pagers, what really speaks to you? So as we enhance our DS story, and us as leaders that constantly need to be learning, we're using the MyWays reports and body of work as a way for us to continue to develop as leaders. The way in which we're doing that, and you'll see that I'll actually fit into this right side under report 10, but we had all of our academic team and leaders read the one-pagers. And so from reading the one-pagers, they got to choose which report they were going to initially go deep on. And so you can see where people are signed up for different reports. But as I've done this process, the report that matters most to me, and this was before I even really started the Art in Motion project, was just like wayfinding abilities for destination unknown. Because I think if we somehow at the end of the day, kids develop those, we're going to get to a place where they'll figure out the future, since we don't know the future. If you look at this Twitter post, this is from our chief of schools and vice president, Jen Ferrari. But what we did is after people read the one-pager reports and the one-pagers of the reports, they chose where they wanted to go deep. Prior to going deep, they created their own closed reading guide. So in I have a closed reading guide about like the entire MyWays body that I've been working on, over the last 6 months. But they are asking their own questions and what they'll be able to speak to the following prior to going deep in the report from the one-pager. Okay, so to Art in Motion. Probably a year ago, when we were talking about MyWays, doing feedback groups on MyWays, and I had just started to realize what it was, I was like, oh my gosh, could you imagine using this body of research to really design a high school and where students go in the future? And so Art in Motion is much more than just a high school. It's really like a place on the south side of Chicago because of the partners around the table. So Distinctive Schools, a huge faith-based organization that does community outreach, as well as the Lynn Group through Common, Academy Award winner and rapper, being from the south side, and a huge social justice hero. But we really, resources that go to the entire community, but through education. So really through our, using MyWays as the key design anchor to how we can move community. So what I did when I started to think through, there's certain visuals. So whenever I talk to people about MyWays, I have them read through the initial summary of all of the reports and the kind of the stuff that Andy just went to. But then I really like to sit down when I'm in meetings with partners now and talk about specific visuals that were pivotal to like our design of Art in Motion. So the first thing when I was writing this school application, if you go back one slide, Andy, because I think that one's important, the 4 colors. Yeah.
Hang on.
Sure. So, within the MyWays triangle with the 4 colors, when we sit down to design a school, we hit the yellow all the time. The English core, the math core. I feel like we're really good at that. I don't think the career technical skills, maybe through learning that, when you think of the graduate profile that Andy showed before. So I feel like because of our partnership with Summit Learning and Summit Public Schools, I feel really pretty good about content knowledge. We've raised the rigor. It's in our 3rd year of iteration of, redesigning our middle school model. And some of the green too. We kind of hit some of that through character ed. But when we really start to get into the red and the blue areas, I started to think about the school design and my application to Chicago Public Schools through like green, red, blue, and yellow. and they're not siloed because they all work together, but from a school designer standpoint, it's helping me to design programs and partnerships by looking at them in separate budgets and separate buckets, and then how those all feed together and work together as we flow and create a deeper design team. Like this graphic I love, because I think when we think about the South Side of Chicago and we think about, bonding versus bridging, we talk about distinctive schools all the time, that you learn from those you love, anything, and the way in which we are successful in our careers is because you have mentors that foster you and teach you things, and then they connect you to people, and you join, even just the MyWays feedback has incredibly grown my professional development and being part of like those focus groups, so networks, or weak ties and resources and connectors. So the major part that is different about Art in Motion is it's distinctive schools' first realm of high school. And so it'll be a 7 through 12 building, but we have elongated our enrichment block to be an arts pathway. So every student will graduate from Art in Motion with either a focus on going to college in some sort of art-focused industry or performing arts, or they will graduate skill ready to join the workforce in the arts industry in the city. That can be catering, that can be soundboards, that can be, think of producing. I mean, the arts touches everything in different disciplines. And so we really think that you don't have to audition to get into Art in Motion. You might have to audition to get into high-level performing classes, but every student who has a passion for the arts and that level of engagement, we want to figure out your path to your future through the arts. And so this visual here, I realized that like it's not just about educating kids and families. It's not just about educating our teachers. If we really want to pull this off and we really want to make improvement in the Grand Crossing community, we need to work just as hard at educating higher levels of institution and finding good partners, and then also finding, recreating the labor force through educating employers about potential over experience. And so with a deep partnership model at Art in Motion, if we're handling our creative and technology through a partner and not necessarily through one staff member, that partner then is able to understand potential over experience, or, the job hunting labyrinth. They can help to inform. So on this right side of the screen, it just shows how we're able to personalize that pathway that leads them on that road, because we can go through, so over time as a 7th and 8th grader, you're studying at different levels, like into your senior year where you're doing a year-long study. So we're playing with time and level of study and process to inform a personalized path to your future. And this model really just shows a big part of this is, I think, to rethink education and to do things differently. There is intersectional innovation and bringing very different perspectives around the table. I'm learning very quickly, especially in this windy city, that there's not a lot of tolerance for that conversation, but something has to disrupt. And I think that businesses getting involved and working together to form a new labor force through education is huge. And so really bringing together these cross-industry experts that are going to provide the resource and opportunity for equity and economic mobility. So it's diverse perspectives around the table. We'll have a million more solutions through our common vision to then, create community development redesign, but also a new labor force for members of the Southside communities that don't have those opportunities right now. The whole thing about partnerships, we're very intentional that our partners understand that by signing up to work with Art in Motion and by giving resources, that we're educating you to build a new labor market, within the arts industry. These two diagrams of caring friends and adults, like how do we help in building social capital? How do they help in navigating the work and learn landscape? And I think that through partnerships, this isolation of youth doesn't necessarily need to happen. I think that, both, and we don't necessarily just want youth only having connections to the adult world either. We want both. And so I think that's a balance of that gray line in the middle of where art and motion can make that less of a gap, but like kids should also be kids, you know, and that's something that we believe. So it's going to be interesting to play and iterate and prototype within that space. This is like this driver's license, and is one of my favorite visuals in the way that you can kind of make anybody understand about, you know, assessment and varied works of assessment. It is my goal to be compliant and to make sure that I reach state standards and everything, but it's also my goal to leverage time, talent, technology, and partnerships differently to get to that compliance. And so I think a lot about the rate of the school business practice, as well as how kids experience learning. There's that technological change that isn't happening in the education industry in general. Like, why do businesses perform on CRMs in a certain way, but schools don't? And it's so underfunded. So really picking partners and a creative agency and technology group that can help us operationalize a school so that even, you know, the human adaptability and technology from our internal school standpoint is different. This is just like a visual for you guys of a day in the life and showing you that community building and kind of like that homeroom. We have a 2-hour humanities block, which is arts augmented. And then a STEM block, which we're going to work on getting arts augmented, right? These are all big ideas, but the bite of the elephant first year will look different than the bite of the, you know, all the bites we eat over 5 years. That arts pathway, a wellness block, as far as, you know, you go to gym, but you have 3 classes that you choose. You can do 3-on-3 basketball, you could do yoga, or you could do your cardio. You know, having options like that feel real world. Those are real decisions that you make, especially being in like upper education or the 7 through 12 space. Something I'm really excited about is the community arts block. So most high schools, you have to do community service to graduate. The community service to graduate at Art in Motion will be given right back to the Grand Crossing community through the arts. And that can mean a lot of different things, but think of like Eagle Scout projects, and you do something for community, but more based on that. A couple things that, you know, as I read through this research and what Andy was saying, I think is most important. I love that MyWays is for, do you call it like all grain sizes or communities? What's that word you guys use, Andy?
Either of those sounds good to me. So
yeah, there's a way that it's like said though, but like, you know, you can be the highest performing school in, you know, Northern Washington, or on the south side of, you know, Chicago, which the media wants to talk about all the time, of that is, in this body of work and research can give you answers, you know. And what school systems constantly need to rethink and reimagine is to be able to overlay something to their context. You know, I think of the point Andy made earlier about we don't even know the jobs of the future yet. One of the problems on the south side is some of those kids don't even know the jobs of now yet. But like this MyWays framework of thinking about it can also get those kids into the jobs of now, you know, especially. And so I think what's so great is that like with MyWays, or great for me, is that the context of the south side of Chicago, every time I read a MyWays, you know, report or I'm into it, I keep thinking, yes, and this for Grand Crossing, and yes, and this for Art in Motion. Kind of to complement I read a book, and it's by Natalie Moore, who's an NPR reporter, but it's called The South Side, and it's a portrait of Chicago and American segregation. And I kept finding myself at the end of every chapter saying, okay, so what do we do? Okay, so what do we do? You know, when it comes to some of these issues with predatory lending and housing or food deserts. A lot of then my ideation and my team's ideation is coming then from like within the MyWays framework to think about how we solve for those problems through education.
Amanda, thank you. You can imagine, everyone on the call, how fulfilling it is, you know, for all of us to have done all of this research. I mean, we're obviously connected to a whole lot of our school design grantees, but then to see people like Amanda and her team at Distinctive literally take this stuff out for road tests and then put their own spin on it and make it grow and make it different. And that's really the ambition for the whole thing, is to have 5 to 10 to 50 to 100,000 different executions of work that involves MyWays somehow, and most of them we'll never know about. But that helps communities move the ball forward in the ways we've been talking about here. So, Delano, we've got a little bit of time left, and I know there are some questions. Can you sort of curate them for us, and we'll try to answer them as briefly as we can?
Sure thing. So before I get to the questions, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Amanda, for sharing about MyWays platform. It sounds like an amazing resource that could be beneficial to a lot of different communities and schools in the country. So as you guys were presenting, we did have a couple questions come through. And folks, if you didn't get a chance to send in your question, now would be the perfect time. If you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat box, and I will read them off in the order they're received. So the first question that I'm going to get to comes from Peter. And Peter, I think this was towards the front end of your presentation, Andy, so Peter asks, does NGLC have a definitive position on whether the economic landscape of a country drives how education is designed, or whether the type of education defines and influences the economic landscape?
Peter, you and I need to go out and have a beer somewhere, or 2 or 3, because that's a really good question, and probably not one that can be answered in 30 seconds. But, I'll offer up that there's a disparate set of nations that are pretty different from each other, like Finland and Singapore and Australia, especially Queensland, that are all pursuing some form of what we've been talking about here. And they're doing it in their own way. But I would say they're finding their own doorways into this work. If there's a common thing that links everybody, no matter what country they live in and no matter what school system they're part of and everything else, it's that we all want our kids to develop their own potential to the best possible advantage and degree, and so different countries are going to find different ways to do it, but the US bizarrely is a little bit behind a number of other countries in moving in a systematic way in the directions that we're talking about here. To be continued when we have that beer. Just email me.
My hypothesis on that right now, or like what I think on a very small community level, on the south side of Chicago, is that I'm hoping that education can help define and influence the economic landscape from like a local sector. First of all, in that community, and then in the city. It gets like a little hard for me to wrap my brain around when I get more macro than that. But that's, from this aspect of how I'm using the work with MyWays.
Great. All right, thank you both for that. So the next question I'm going to get to comes from Ali, and Ali asks, how do you gauge student growth in the various competencies listed in the MyWays framework?
Also a really good, rich question, and there are only partial answers for that question right now, as you probably can already guess. There's a lot of work being done right now around forms of assessment and measurement for the competencies that lie outside of the core academic areas. NGLC is actually playing a pretty central role in all that. We have something called the Assessment for Learning project that Gates and Hewlett Foundations are funding, that we're doing in partnership with a couple of other organizations. You can find that work at assessmentforlearningproject.org, and you'll see there a lot of really, really provocative experiments in what it might look like to recast and rebrand assessment so that it is understood to be principally in support of learning and not in support of tracking and monitoring, although that's not unimportant either. It's just it has become way too important, and it's changed the ways everybody thinks about the word assessment. So it is, to borrow a phrase from Amanda, it's in motion, and it's important, and we need to get there so that we can define how kids are progressing. But we need to be careful about how we do it so that we don't fall into some of the same traps that we fell into in standards-based reform era number 1.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So we are just at we have about 3 more minutes. So if you have any last burning questions, now would be the time to send them. So Andy, as you were presenting, I think there was some questions, or maybe this was as you were presenting, Amanda, about are there any elementary schools around the country that MyWays has partnered with? And I know Grace has, she entered the chat and kind of answered the question, but if you want to provide additional information about any elementary school cases that you might have.
Well, I want to just clarify really quick too that so Distinctive Schools is K through 8. So it is elementary, and I'm kind of piloting and ideating onto the high school level. So the work that the rest of the team is doing has been around elementary work, just as a.
And one of those schools in particular, West Belden, K-8 in Chicago, is one of the places that we've taken a lot of our grantees and other visitors nationally. So if you want to go to an urban school that's really doing this in interesting ways and has been at it for 3 years, West Belden is a good place to go. You can find lots of elementary schools at our website, nextgenlearning.org. When you go there, just click on grantees in the left-hand column, and you'll be able to find your way there. And one other good resource is to go to gettingsmart.com. That's Tom Vander Ark's site. He's got a list of 85 K-8 schools or K-5 schools and middle schools, most worth visiting in the whole U.S. And I would be remiss if I didn't just happen to mention that the top one on the list, Horace Mann Elementary in Washington, D.C., a D.C. public school, is run by my sister. She's the principal. That's
cool.
That's a proud brother talking. Yeah.
Also, I was talking about being a special education teacher. So I was a special education teacher at West Belden. And when we first started and took it over, and then into the school designer with Scott, and so now here we are. So I think a lot of that, continuity and staff for all of that is really important.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we're at time. Again, thank you so much to Andy and Amanda. For the folks viewing, if you can join me in giving a round of applause and a thumbs up and a thank you, or whatever you like to do to celebrate people's contribution. Thank you so much. So following this, I'll send out an email to everybody who's on the session, as well as those who weren't able to make it today, so you can check out this video, and we'll share the PowerPoint and whatever other, and the resources that, a couple other resources. So be on the lookout for the announcement for our next session, scheduled for March 13th, and details will be following. They'll come up soon. Sorry. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
All right. Thank you, Amanda.
Sure. Bye. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.